I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Good morning, Mr. J.
How are you doing, sir?
Good. We are talking about Dario Amodei's essay, Machines of Loving Grace. So maybe we start with a short introduction. So Dario Amodei is the CEO of Anthropic, one of the big AI labs. And at the end of last year, he wrote this essay that got a lot of play called Machines of Loving Grace. And it is a techno-optimistic manifesto, quite impressive, sort of charting out the mid-range / close-range future of AI. And Amodei essentially argues that in the next 5 to 7 to at most 10 years, we will have artificial general intelligence and then artificial superintelligence. So artificial intelligence that is at and then quite quickly beyond and far beyond the levels of human capability, and that this will bring about revolutions primarily and most significantly in biology and neuroscience, and specifically that it might accelerate our capacity to cure diseases, find new scientific techniques, replace and exceed the capability of researchers, such that in the end, in quite the near future, we will be able to achieve something he calls biological freedom. So pretty much forget about most of the diseases afflicting us today. Determine the design of our own bodies, overcome most mental health situations by being able to identify their neurological correlates. And so, again, a sort of quite moving picture of what an exponential growth in AI might mean. So this in some ways for me answers a question that I've been complaining about a lot, where it's not quite clear, what the cash value of AI is, what the payout of AI is, what there is beyond the hype of something being able to make calls for you and book your plane tickets. So Amodei, gives us a pretty amazing picture of that. For me, Jay, quite in the tradition of, Descartes' discourse on method, like in some of the old classical transhumanist manifestos of saying, here is what science and technology can really do for us if we harness their full potential. Does that sound like a fair summary to you?
Yeah, I think it harks all the way back to one of my favorite essays, Condorcet's essay on a Prologue to the Future of the Human Mind, where he tries to chart out what the French Revolution's impact will be in the far future and technology and everything else. I like the essay. I think it's an essay that is somewhat closer to what I call the techno-progressive perspective, that takes futurist possibilities seriously into account in a very detailed way, but also takes poverty, war, all the bad things in the world into account, and the possibility that technology could worsen things as well as make them better. And as a consequence, he is consciously trying to position himself against people like David Horowitz, is that his name, David? Who wrote the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, and that was in 2023, which was kind of the accelerationist, libertarian, now Trump-Musk vision of unleashing AI, or Sam Altman-style boosterism about, I've got a product, it could destroy the world, but don't worry about that. It's going to be, great for everything. And on the other hand, AI doomers and skeptics who don't think that the technology actually is there here or will come, or who think that it could destroy the world and therefore should just be shut down. So he's clearly positioning himself between those kinds of ends of the discourse, and he talks about all the right things. I don't think he comes up with as many solutions as I would like. He's focused on AI could make things better, could make things worse, and here's how it could make things better, and that's good. So
yeah, I mean, it's more of a vision for the future than solutions. Really, the premise of this is, and we should say that Amadou, unlike at least some of the other people that you mentioned, is a very credible scientist himself with a scientific background in biology and neuroscience.
His detailed comments on how science advances were fascinating. About that the 1% of scientists come up with the breakthroughs in methodology that advance the rest of science, and if we could accelerate that we accelerate everything else. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So the sort of promise of AI, as he frames it, is what would it do to the rate of scientific discovery if rather than having one genius or two geniuses per generation, you had an entire country of geniuses, as he puts it, in a data center? So if you had, super intelligences kind of lined up working on scientific discovery, working on for example, the drug discovery method. So one example that he gives, which was compelling, is you get a kind of CRISPR-like invention, CRISPR being the tool for genetic editing that revolutionized that field some years ago. He says you get something of that importance and significance every 25 years. What if you had 25 of those every 1 year? Right. And he thinks that the introduction of artificial intelligence into medical research does promise that. And then you just get an exponential acceleration of discoveries.
Right. I think that's the important part that makes this a futurist or techno-progressive or techno-optimist kind of manifesto, is that it assumes exponential progress. And the way he frames it, I like. He says, it's not that we're going to get 100 years of progress in the coming year, but we may get 1,000 years of progress in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And so, that fits with, the idea of, you double something every day and eventually you get, uncountable billions, but it doesn't happen immediately. And the other assumption I think he's making is that kind of exponential progress with agentic AI, which, of course, all the big firms that he's a part of, but he's positioned himself and his firm as more of a techno-cautionary or trying to make sure that the AI doesn't get out of control more than the other firms. But he still assumes that we're going to have these powerful scientists in a box that can do stuff for us.
Yeah. So as I understand it, the kind of paradigm shift here is artificial general intelligence, and really what Amodei has in mind is artificial superintelligence, so an intelligence that's far greater than humans. It shifts from data analysis, which in the end has been the role and function of AI up until now, finding patterns in data that, sort of humans make available to it, to being another scientist in the lab. And I think so right now, even if
or being the lab manager.
Being a lab manager, right? Being a primary investigator. So if now AI is a tool for the primary investigator in a given university lab to help sift through data more quickly, the vision here is that AI becomes the primary investigator, or that a lab that has one primary investigator might have now one human one and 50 AI ones, depending on how much money they have. And if you multiply that over many, many labs, you get the kind of remarkable results that he's talking about.
Did he convince you? I mean, we can talk about the specific kinds of predictions, radical progress in life expectancy, the elimination of mental illness, all these kinds of things that he thinks are pretty proximate goals.
I mean, in some ways, he convinced me that theoretically this is possible. His location of the limitations of scientific research now was essentially you have a slow rate, like what he says makes the big differences is the big scientific theories and the big scientific tools. So an example of scientific theory which revolutionizes our health would be the germ theory of disease, right? Which, for example, cuts infant mortality in the 20th century by a pretty dramatic rate. And the tool would be something like CRISPR. And the argument was we got those very rarely, and whether or not we got them was a bit random and accidental. And the question to me is tantalizing. What happens if you get 100 correlates of the germ theory of disease? What happens if you get 100 correlates of CRISPR and everything remarkable becomes, frequent and unremarkable? What kind of progress do you make? So if there was a technology that could accelerate and organize those kind of developments, then yes, the argument is compelling. And, his claim is that AI in the next 5 years is going to become that technology. I mean, I guess one question is what is standing in, what needs to happen for AI to become that technology?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he gives attention to whether his answers are satisfactory. He gives attention to the fact that AI will be moving at light speed, and humans don't move at light speed, and so the diffusion of innovation, he talks at length about clinical trials, which I love because I've been working on this topic a lot as well for 20 years, and how can we reform clinical trials, speed them up, and so forth. He talks about the fact that they are inevitably a time cost in the innovation of medicine. The diffusion of therapies to the world and the lack of access and how that's related to wealth. He talks about pushback, regulatory pushback, bad things that these things might do, which will cause everyone to want to put them back in the box. And I think that's all very good. What occurs Wiley futurism is look at the exponential curve and how much we can do on a chip. And by 2045, that means that we'll have super intelligence, and therefore everything will change. And it could be that you create super intelligence in one box and you don't have to diffuse it to the world because it just takes over the world. But I think this is a far more cautious approach to say, look, there are all of these roadblocks. So even though we may have 1,000 years of progress in the next 10 years in science, we may not see the benefits of that for everyone for another 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. And, you're right about the political skepticism. So whether or not, for example, the benefits of the technology get distributed to the rest of the world is a political question, and is less likely in a populist America first kind of environment than in a more cosmopolitan environment. And I think he recognizes that, as you say, politics moves slowly and less efficiently than technology.
I don't know if we want to jump ahead to that part of his essay, but that is a remarkable, also a political statement that he makes at the end about the geopolitical situation. And he aligns himself with the AI supremacy argument that it is in the interest of liberal democracy, which he admirably promotes in the essay, for liberal democracies to stay ahead of China and other authoritarian regimes with these technologies, and that we should adopt trade policies and tariffs and so forth that have that goal. Not the tariffs that we've got, but the different kinds of tariffs. So I think that was fascinating as well, and I generally agree with that kind of an argument. I mean, I'm aligned with Biden's approach of selective chip controls on China, industrial policy to support AI manufacturing in the West, and so forth.
Yeah, I guess we can get back to the sort of virtuous arms race argument before, whether or not after he wrote this essay, DeepSeek came out, and it became clear that the ability to keep the technology from the Chinese, for example, is more limited than we thought it is, and that the kind of system is much more interactive than we were assuming that it is.
I think it's also clear that U.S. tech supremacy isn't necessarily liberal democratic tech supremacy anymore.
No, that's a good point. I guess still on the technical side of things, one thing I guess I wasn't so sure about is where's the leap from existing LLMs that are making progress to this kind of super intelligence. The gap there still seems, at least for somebody, living in the world of existing models and playing with them, pretty huge. They don't seem like Nobel Prize, and Nobel Prize winners in a box or anywhere near it.
Well, that's a very important point that I think a lot of people in the tech, in the AI intelligence debate are beginning to talk about, which is that what the hell did we mean by AGI? What are the tests for it? Is it actually 12 different things that we thought were all in one box and actually may not be? And I just came from this conference in Florida, Mindfest, and that was one of the topics of conversation. So, for instance, it's clear that these LLMs already know more than any human being, even though they make mistakes, and some of those mistakes that they make aren't the mistakes that you would make. They still know a hell of a lot more about a lot of other topics than you do. So they're ahead of us in that regard, and they're better at calculation than most people are, and writing than most people are, et cetera. But they have other glaring common sense weaknesses. And the assumption had been that if you actually have a human in a box, that they wouldn't have those kinds of weaknesses. So is that true? Could you have super intelligence without all these other features that we assume an intelligent being should have on the basis of the human brain? Would you necessarily, does having empathy or having suffering, being sentient necessarily, or being conscious necessarily go together with becoming more intelligent at some point? Is it an emergent trait? Right. And we had the guy from Closer to Truth, Robert Kuhn, I think is his name. He gave a great paper about the hundreds of different consciousness theories, and that there's no consensus about what consciousness is, or what intelligence is, or how these pieces all fit together. And now that we're at the cusp of having philosophical zombies that can talk to us as if they're actual human beings and be quite convincing about it, and be quite convincing about being smart about a lot of topics, that we have to start being very precise about what the next steps might be, and if they could go in 12 different directions.
Yeah. His definition, I'm looking at his definition of intelligence is, or AGI, is a model that is smarter than a Nobel Prize winner across different domains and has access to all the platforms that a human being working remotely has access to. So his idea is,
super smart agents.
Super duper smart agents that would be as if a room full of Nobel Prize winners across scientific areas were working remotely. You would think that a Nobel Prize winner, for example, could tell you how many R's there are in the word strawberry, but a lot of AI models still can't do that. One thing I liked about this essay, and I think the most interesting way for us to discuss it in some way is akin to, biblical interpretation, namely assume that he's right. Assume that it's true. He is skeptical of. He is skeptical of, the sort of the contribution of intelligence to the world, which I thought was kind of a clever move to make. He does say that, there are such things as grit, as luck, as you said, empathy that determine the success and failure of scientific projects too. And so at some point there's diminishing returns on intelligence. So I thought that was interesting, that the world has limitations that are not completely susceptible to intelligence.
Right. He talked at the beginning about, okay, if there are different components of economics, like labor and capital, and intelligence might be one of those components. If you just ramp up the intelligence, how does that change the world? I thought that was an interesting way to start the essay.
Yeah. So, but let's go to biology for a moment. And again, let's assume that broadly speaking, he's right. You get these scientists in in a box, as it were. You get these AI Nobel level intelligences. And, one concrete innovation that you mentioned is, for example, we'd be shortening clinical trials by developing, AI run models and simulations like that are better than the animal models that we have. So you'd cut the amount of time necessary for drug discovery, and you'd cut the amount of time necessary for clinical trials, and you'd basically accelerate the pace of these theories and discoveries like we talked about, like the germ theory of disease and CRISPR. And so assume all of that's right. The result for him would be what he calls biological freedom, that we would very quickly, probably by the time that, our kids get around to having their kids, manage to completely control, our weight and our appearance, not to talk about, other biological features like what diseases we get. And everybody will be empowered to become the most appealing version of themselves. And so here he gets more into sort of some of the traditional transhumanist territory that you and I fight about.
Yeah, no, I love that part of the essay, of course. I was just on a panel about transhumanism with some of my old interlocutors. And I think all of us agreed that transhumanism isn't really a going thing anymore because it's already here. And his essay reflects, the fact that you don't need to talk about transhumanism. You just talk about what we could accomplish in the next couple decades. And I agree with the things that he, of course, wants to accomplish. I think this kind of biological freedom is what most people want, and is the natural trajectory of what we've been doing with medicine. So yeah, I'm all in for that. I think he doesn't give as much attention to the perspective that it also gives you the freedom to create super pathogens, to make super mistakes of one kind or another. And that's, that goes, that's the parallel, the shadow of everything that he's talking about.
That's a good point. So in his world, I mean, you and I have been talking a lot about the GLP-1 drugs, the Wegovy's, etc. Again, those are discovered by mistake, like a lot of our kind of, leading medical solutions, right? They're kind of, people notice an off-label benefit, and then the off-label benefit becomes the main label benefit. And what Amodei is offering is to completely revolutionize that random process of progress into a directed process of progress. What if somebody could, years ago figure out that this is one of the things that GLP-1s can do? And
which is already happening in drug discovery. I mean, you can already submit tens of thousands of molecules to an AI and say, given everything that we know, which ones should work and which ones should we test, and that's already showing evidence of success.
Yeah. So you're right. The problem he sees about this future, near-term future of absolute biological freedom, the only problem he has, and that's, I think, typical actually of the tech people, is a problem of access, right? He's worried that, as usual with technologies, the access will be unequal. And you and I have talked about this a lot. That's probably true, but also is not an indictment of the technology, but rather a call for better public policy. You put on the table a second problem that he really doesn't address very carefully, the idea that having the ability to super manipulate biology will let us super manipulate it in bad directions too and create super pathogens. I guess the third sort of humanist problem that you and I have been fighting about, for a long time now, has to do with whether super choice, biological freedom, etc., is an absolutely good idea, or does it create the kind of vertiginous reality in which we don't know quite what to do with ourselves, which we have too much freedom, which we have too much possibilities for customization, etc.
I think you're displaying that you have a mental health issue about future shock, and he has some solutions for that too.
That can be solved too. So all that's required is to just sort of engineer my anxiety away.
Yeah, you will be assimilated, Nir, I'm afraid.
I'm going to choose my anxiety and death, and therefore you'll stay alone with your biological freedom. With right. All of the other
the great natural selection.
Exactly.
All the Luddites stay by.
Yeah, actually, that's to be serious about the natural selection point. That's interesting because what this amounts to. And I know your colleague Greg Stalk sort of embraces this, but what all of this amounts to is a revamping of the evolutionary process and the replacement of natural selection with artificial selection and of random variation with chosen variation. So, the sort of classical picture of evolution in a transhumanist AI-powered world of biology goes out the window, right? Or some of it.
Well, again, I think we have to apply our usual question of, is this really new? I mean, human beings have been selecting their own evolution for a long time. I mean,
just their power to do it has been shaky.
Right. Polygamy was the dominant form of mating before monogamy came into vogue. And that meant that basically certain guys got to reproduce their genes a lot more than others, and certain traits are being selected. And we've been doing that with our animals and turning, wolves into dogs and so forth. So it's not as if control over evolution is an entirely novel thing. We've been doing it in one way or another. We just haven't been doing it very intentionally or with the scientific speed that we'll be capable of.
And this is systematic and fast control over evolution, and at least one advantage of our half-assed control over evolution or attempts to control it so far has been that it was very slow and we had more time to realize mistakes and learn from them. Dogs is an interesting case study, by the way. So we have been the evolution of dogs for thousands of years. We kind of suck at that. If you look around,
Well, you don't like Chihuahuas? What's your problem?
Well, there's some things I'm afraid to say, but no, I don't like Chihuahuas.
Okay, we don't want to make the podcast too controversial,
exactly.
So we'll go after dog breeds.
We might get in trouble with the League of Chihuahua Defense.
Well, I don't know exactly what problem you have with the evolution of dogs, but I think it shows that
dogs' best interests are not really, sort of driving that, as it were. Well, we're making hypoallergenic dogs of, this is completely, I'm being.
Well, hypoallergenic pets is one of the applications of genetic modification of pets today.
That's right. That's right, but that's for us, not for dogs.
Yeah, but isn't that a good thing that someone could have a cat finally?
Well, not a cat, but yeah, maybe if someone could have a dog, that's a good thing.
A cat or a dog. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that the evolution of dogs has been this example where natural selection was replaced by artificial selection. Random variation was completely replaced by intentional variation, especially when it comes to breeds. And so all of these doodles, and I have a doodle and I love him to death, but all of these doodles are remarkably, neurotic, prone to all kinds of problems. They're, they are Frankenstein dogs that combine, intelligence with silliness, and they're a very weird experiment. And it's mainly so that, our kids who, as a result of other technological developments we gave an endless array of allergies to, can have dogs.
Well, the products of pure natural selection in the environment aren't all cuddly little pets. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to tame a possum or a raccoon.
Yeah.
But, dogs are a hell of a lot more attuned to us than any other species.
Although I would prefer a possum fighting a snake than my Labradoodle.
Well, for personal defense, yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
I don't share the intuition that us having intentional control over evolution is going to be a problem. But I do think that there's a question of the politics of it. Is it going to be us making individual choices about how we control our own bodies or our children's bodies?
Yeah.
that will lead in one general direction statistically, or is it going to be government policy that you have to do X? And of course, I prefer the former.
I mean, regardless of our normative assessment of it, this, I think descriptively we can agree that Amadou's vision, what it actually means, and which curiously he doesn't say, and it's curious because he is a biologist, it does mean a complete human takeover of evolution, which has been a half-assed, slow takeover. Now, you might think that's a good thing. You might think, like me, that that's, quite a wild bet. But I do think that kind of matter-of-factly, that's the basic idea.
I think there's a general problem with his essay and is peculiar that he names it after the Richard Brautigan poem, Machines of Love and Grace. And that poem is about basically turning over management of not only ourselves but nature to machines. That he doesn't give full credence to the idea that human beings will lose collective agency or individual agency to machines that have different goals than we do.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the doomer concern that I share, and I think he should have given more attention to. Will we become the agents? What would the interest of a self-interested AI be in guiding human evolution? It probably wouldn't be to make us smarter, make us dumber.
Yeah, I mean, especially as we watch, Doge take over functions of the federal government with potentially the aim of replacing some of them with AI, and Mr. Musk tweeting out that the Jews in Europe were killed by the public bureaucracy rather than
AI is already here and it's destroying the U.S. government.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is, what about the very real possibility that instead of machines of love and grace, we'll get machines of crappy nastiness. And yeah, that's I don't think that's taken seriously enough.
And when you get into the mental health and the neuroscience part of it, I think the prospects become even more troubling. I mean, we've been talking for years now about preference algorithms and how they shape our minds and aesthetic choices and behavior, social media. And if you imagine AI being put at the service of all of these attention grabbing and attention distorting mechanisms in our world, I don't know how the mental health picture looks that great. But the kinds of things he's thinking about are cures for depression and schizophrenia and so on. So,
yeah, let's talk about the mental health picture for a moment. Then, so he says that AI will do for neuroscience and mental health the same that it will do for biology, namely that it will allow us to essentially choose our mental health attributes and control our mood and cure mental illnesses. So all mental illnesses would essentially be cured by brain-based interventions, PTSD, addiction, depression, anxiety. For him, they're all brain-based, neurologically mediated conditions that can be addressed by the right kind of AI-discovered intervention. And so this is the sort of optimistic version rather than the sort of Elon Musk mind control version of the picture. By the way, topic for a different podcast, but given the dispositions that he has been displaying in the last few months, the fact that Elon Musk has the leading brain-computer interface technology is more troubling to me than it used to be. But let's stay with Dario for a moment. So, but on the even on the optimistic view, I guess there's a couple of things that, even if I'm not pushing the hardcore Luddite line, I think is worth pointing out. One is that this is a profoundly materialist picture that Dario has. And that's, it leaves out the possibility, for example, that there might be, a philosophical or a moral aspect to some of these conditions, like anxiety and addiction. There's still, a raging debate about whether addiction is purely a neurological disease or a combination of a disease with, sort of aspects that do submit to the will. That hasn't been, yeah.
Trapped rats in cages take drugs, but they don't when they're free, and maybe that's the problem. Yeah. I think he definitely has that materialist perspective. It's more about the DSM-3 than about a generalized philosophical diagnosis of existential ennui. But 20% of the population, 30% something, could have a DSM-3 type diagnosable condition, and a DSM-5, I guess it is now. And I think if we could fix the big ones, depression and so forth, but the philosophical question there is, what is a flourishing life? And if we start to have neurotechnologies that give us, brain-computer interfaces that keep us permanently happy no matter what our situation is, then we're in land of the lotus eaters.
Right.
Brave New World territory. We're not in a flourishing life.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're right. Extreme anxiety that doesn't let you function should be tweaked away. Appropriate anxiety that comes from living among other self-conscious beings is maybe helpful, maybe useful. I guess as a practical question, I doubt whether if the possibility to tweak anxiety is introduced that people would suffice with tweaking away the extreme one. I think the Lotus Eater scenario would come about and we'd need to figure out what to do with it. Whether or not that's worth it, I guess, is a difference, between us. But
well, I'm optimistic that one of the things that's going to happen with these kinds of tools, these digital agents, is that we're going to have tools which we already do, but we're going to have better tools which monitor us. And one of our goals will be to not only reduce our anxiety and be happier, but also to be more effective in the world and to have more flourishing lives. And so the degree to which people use those tools to manage their lives and their mental health would push us ideally in a direction that doesn't just maximize hedonism, but also maximizes efficacy and flourishing. That's my optimistic take on this. And I think that his vision of agentic AI, although he's talking more about it as its impact on the workforce and controlling our consumer behavior, things like that, but it also will be applied to managing our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one picture of flourishing, though, might be the ability to keep in check and maybe even sometimes harness our anxieties and depressions and conditions that we can't completely control, but we can sort of mine for something. And if you have the tools to just not have those conditions, I do think that in the end, even if you disagree with me, which you do, would change our definition of flourishing. Because
the way I usually talk about it is that, if you survey people about how happy they are on a daily basis, it's a range. You could put it on a range of 0 to 10, and the people at 0 are always depressed, and the people at 10 are super happy all the time. And maybe they're 1% of the population. Almost everything improves. Most people are around 6, a little bit happier than they are unhappy. But if you could push people from 6 to 9, almost everything would improve. You'd have more friends, you'd be better at your job, you'd be happier with your life, et cetera, et cetera. When you get to 10, the evidence is that people don't vote as much, they don't get married as much. They're too happy to actually accomplish anything in their lives. And I don't want people to be pushed to 10. I think the debate that you and I should have is, you seem to think that people would be better off at 7 or 6, and I think they'd be better off at 9.
I'm good with the move to 6 to 7. After then, the hammer comes down. We're from 5 to 6, more realistically.
You're too happy now. No, this is bad for you.
Exactly. Yeah, one point in the article which kind of blew me away, in which I do think that he really does enter Lotus Eater land. By the way, the Lotus Eater reference is from the Odyssey, where Odysseus and his buddies partook of a plant or flower that made them forget their troubles. One part where I think he really goes there, and I was wondering what you thought about that. He says that in addition to curing mental illnesses, that AI accelerated neuroscience will let us increase the frequency and the intensity of having extraordinary experience, like transcendence or love or meditative peace. So, these feelings that are so unusual and remarkable, like that once in a while you feel you love everyone, or that you get a moment of transcendence, or that you're one with the environment. So, these kind of great experiences that you remember and you miss. And he says, we'll figure out the neuroscience of these experiences, and then you'll just be able to have them all the time. That's bullshit. If you have them all the time, they won't be great in transcendence and formative. Like, how does he not get that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I'm a Buddhist, and in Buddhism, the idea is, yes, you want to taste that experience, but you can't live in that experience. You don't want to be driving down the street in a state of oneness. So I agree that that's a little fanciful, and I don't know why. I don't see the immediate efficacy of AI in helping us to achieve those things. Maybe to understand what's going on in the brain. That's
once you understand, you can manipulate, right?
Yeah, right. But it may be through psychedelics and things like that we do it.
Yeah, but psychedelics are still in some ways a big deal. You kind of have to have a whole setup, and you have to find someone you trust, and preferably in a therapeutic setting, et cetera, et cetera.
And it's a transient experience.
But if the promise here is for the transcendent experience to become ordinary and non-transient, there's a definitional problem of it still being transcendent under those circumstances and special. There's also a temptation argument there. Who would be able to resist this, even if you knew that it was bad for you? So it would be like Odysseus kind of saying, gotta keep eating the lotus flower.
Well, this gets to an argument that we've had within transhumanist circles about the hedonistic imperative that David Pierce has promoted. And he argues that, okay, if the average span is 0 to 10, we should crank everybody up to 11 and make the motivation getting from 11 to 13, super bliss to super bliss. And that would motivate us as much as doing all the things that we do now. And my answer to that, and I think most people's, is, well, I think after a while living at 11, that becomes the new 0 and 13 becomes the new 10. And we're just back to square one,
Yeah. And you'd have to find brand new transcendence experiences. Right. And I guess I want to go back, leaving the neuroscience part behind. I want to go back to something that you were mentioning earlier, and this is the interaction between politics and the optimistic predictions that Dario has here. I want to offer you an analogy and see what you think. When psychedelics came on the scene under Leary and the 60s and the 70s, there was an initial remarkable promise. There was an initial remarkable uptake. And then they went into deep freeze, both for cultural reasons and for reasons that some of the people promoting them were fuck-ups and made, pretty serious research mistakes. And they're just coming out of that deep freeze. They still have the same remarkable potential. I think we're making progress in understanding what MDMA can do for, PTSD and anxiety and OCD. There's remarkable promise there. Nevertheless, there was like a 40-year hiatus. I suspect that what is going to be the downfall of the Dario Beautiful vision here, or even the practical parts of the Dario Beautiful vision, is that the tech bros under Trump are going to completely discredit AI, and that there's going to be a backlash against it. Do you buy that analogy?
I worry about that analogy. I think, we definitely see it in the kind of tech enthusiasm or transhumanist visions that I've promoted that our peripheral association with a handful of fascist billionaires, most of whom have never called themselves transhumanist, still has cost us tremendously in terms of public perception and contributed to progressives having a deep suspicion of all these kinds of technological promises. And I think, half of that suspicion I share, and the other half I think they should be considering the the optimistic vision. I mean, again, Amodei's essay sits in a politically progressive space in that he's asking politically progressive questions. He's not necessarily giving political advice yet about where to go.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting and ironic that the most compelling and in some ways beautiful picture of the AI-enabled future has come from Amodei and from the lab that actually most genuinely is worried about AI risk. So he seems like the only one who's actually the most anxious person of about AI risk is also the one who painted us a picture of what could go right.
Well, and Altman had positioned himself as someone who was talking about UBI and running UBI and still running UBI experiments for more than a decade. But when push came to shove and they had to commodify and monetize what they were doing, they were willing to throw everything out the window and become champions of unfettered progress. So I think in that regard, he's better than the boosters who were, they were talking about caution and risks until it was not profitable to do so.
Yeah. Interesting in that context, by the way, and of course, an N of one, but I've been playing with Grok in the last few weeks to see, to see how it's calibrated and how it compares. And I can see, in one way, I have to confess, it's much more entertaining than ChatGPT. And actually, interestingly enough, because they don't give a shit about risk, I guess they removed the delay in terms of access to data. So they're always up to date. In some basic way, it's just more funny to talk to, but I can totally see how it becomes an asshole chatbot very, very quickly. And
he actually has a slider. You could turn it on and make it more of an asshole if you want.
And, it can be, I could see how that becomes, apropos the analogy with psychedelics, I could see how engagement with that, if the slider is on, becomes one of the things that discredits the kind of technology.
Yeah. Well, Grok, the reason I'm willing to experiment with Grok is that I see all these things that it says about Musk, and it's like, okay, if you haven't neutered your AI yet, then I'm still curious about what it has to say.
I guess we should just say, so everyone's on the same page, Grok is the AI model that's built into X, into Twitter.
Right. And if you ask it, who's the biggest spreader of misinformation on X, it says Elon Musk is, because it's reading everybody's Twitter posts and coming to that conclusion.
He just took all of his quality control, probably a team, and put it into Doge, so nobody's checking.
Oh, really? Doge has a quality control team? I didn't realize.
I don't know. I'm kidding.
He should move it back over to SpaceX, because since they keep littering
the SpaceX rockets are going to fall on the Teslas.
Yeah. Okay, well, I did appreciate some of his thoughts about democracy. Again, he was very full-throated in his advocacy for liberal democracy, and you presumably agreed with that. Did you think he was too nationalistic and where he came from?
No. I think if there's any way that we could manipulate international relations so that liberal democracies have closer control over AI than authoritarian regimes, then that would be wonderful. Sadly, a lot of the important liberal democracies are becoming more and more authoritarian, banal statement of the week. So there's still a very big difference in the end between the United States and China, namely that the amount of damage that we can do here in 4 and even 8 years is not going to bring us anywhere near where China is. It's just going to be super depressing.
Right.
But, that aside, I don't know, the DeepSeek thing from a month and a half ago kind of convinced me that the ability to control the speed of AI development and sort of make sure that the Chinese stay behind us in that aspect is a bit of a pipe dream. Or am I wrong about that?
Oh no, I think that's the conclusion everyone drew from that DeepSeek release, and now we've got Manus, which is a Chinese version of Operator that is an agentic system that can do your shopping for you and whatnot. And those systems are cheaper, and the DeepSeek was released public source, open source, so. I think one of the conclusions that people drew was that as soon as you have a big proprietary system that you can train an open source or another proprietary system off of that big proprietary system and distill its efficacy into a smaller system, that means that you can't really stay ahead very easily in this market unless you lock down access to these systems in various ways, and they're trying to figure out if they can do that. And it also means that engineering design, what they came up with, actually, they're not that much novel. There had been publications suggesting all of the things that DeepSeek did to tweak the way that they were training these models, but the different architectural innovations that they made showed that thinking good engineers could think ways around the bottlenecks of not having enough data. And now we have had the release of 4.5 ChatGPT, which had another order of magnitude data added to it from 4, and it didn't perform any better. And so there's been this question of if you needed to keep scaling up the amount of data and the amount of computing runs, then you could invest in the server farms and the nuclear power stations to run them, and you would be able to stay ahead. But if it immediately you take whatever product you've released in the world and it can be distilled into a cheap open source model and run better with engineering innovations, then there's no way to stay ahead. And China, I think, we've always known half of all the college graduates in China are engineers of one sort or another. So, it's only 5% the United States. So there's a reason why the H-1B visa is here, is because we're just not that great at building up this kind of scientific talent. And China has that talent, and they are explicitly orienting towards automation. They've had a program in southern China, I forget which province, but called, replacing 1 million workers with robots. That was the official government policy, was to replace workers. And that's because they have this huge labor shortage. So they have this immense incentive. They have the immense resources. They have a lot of money to throw at it. And I think China is a threat in that respect because I don't want their political system to dominate. But on the other hand, they released it free to the world. People have to make this decision now. Do I want the possibility, like Korea just banned DeepSeek because it turned out that DeepSeek does send some packets back to Beijing. And you just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, so I think the political part of the essay, as I understood it, Dario's vision was that there needs to be a carrot and stick here, and the carrot would be something like, well, we would keep AI supremacy, we would develop AI-powered cures for cancer, and we'd start giving those cures for cancer to, other parts of the world, and even to authoritarians, because we, recognize that citizens in authoritarian countries shouldn't die of cancer either. But we would, expect and require a certain kind of adherence to, rules, norms, human rights, et cetera, in return.
But this is a feature of his perspective that I think is an open question, is whether you can build a constitution into one of these systems that is resistant to being changed, right? So as we've talked about, most of the LLMs that have been released are produced in California and reflect California values, liberal, democratic, et cetera, of one sort or another. But, Grok, supposedly being a system that had no political bias applied to its training, still has a general point of view. But are these points of view intrinsic and immutable or resistant to change in these systems? Or is China going to demonstrate that you can have one that completely supports authoritarian governance as opposed to, or a fascist one or whatever? And I generally think that you're probably going to be able to have fascist AIs.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Yeah.
And I think he's more suspicious that won't happen.
Yeah, but And I think that the idea that we will have some kind of AI powered advances that we can sort of wave to the Chinese with that they don't have, I think is just not going to happen. I think, the Chinese will come up with their AI powered cancer cure. And so I think the arms race metaphor here, is not so helpful. There is an interesting historical analogy here that might be useful to think about. So, Secretary of War during World War II and a little after, Stimson, as he retires, I think in around 46 or 47, I don't remember exactly which. He kind of writes he writes a memo for Truman, and in the memo he says, I really think the Russians are building their own nuclear weapon, and I really think that we should, share the nuclear secrets with the Russians. And he kind of foresees the pushback that he would get from the rest of the cabinet, which he did, which is, Stalin's insane, or, Stalin's an authoritarian. Why would you share the, greatest technology that we have with them? And he has a striking line in his goodbye memo. He says, in a long career, I've learned that the only way to make an untrustworthy person trustworthy is to trust them. I've always found that really interesting and compelling.
Well, you can find people in the AI safety community, which is now completely out of power, out of fashion. But you can still find people in that community who think that the correct approach to China is to connect with the Chinese academics and policymakers who exist, who have expressed concerns about existential risks or catastrophic risks from AI, and make the case that we need a new détente around these issues and new set of international agreements. I think that that's a plausible path that diplomacy could take.
Yeah, I guess I'm sympathetic to that more than to the arms race picture that Dario draws, in part, by the way, because I don't think that the existential risk, at least now, from AI is similar to the existential risk from nuclear weapons. I think the whole nuclear weapons analogy, in part, is animated by people working on AI, wanting to think that what they're doing is super duper life-changing and important. And, Dario aside, I think it's just not yet. It's getting there. Maybe it will get there. Maybe it won't. I think the stakes are lower in AI than in nuclear weapons, and as a result, the motivation to try to collaborate should be higher. It's more rational.
Well, saying the stakes are lower reflects that you don't take seriously the exponential acceleration argument,
I don't,
right?
I don't, because I think politics is going to block it, and also I think before we accelerate into curing cancer, it really should be able to count how many R's there are in strawberry.
Right. One of the things, given his that he thinks that alignment could be achieved in a machine and that it would be resistant to change, he doesn't take seriously the notion that AI systems intentionally or of their own volition may be able to work around all the human constraints, that we may think we're still in control, but actually the strings are being pulled some other way.
Yeah. It looks to me like most of AI's remarkable capabilities will be put into in the next few years, figuring out the great benefits of homeopathic drops. So I think we're gonna have a bit of a delay.
That's the first AI that is tweaked to say homeopathy works. I'll know that we're really in deep trouble.
Yeah. All right, sir.
Well, that was great. There are a number of other essays out there. As I mentioned, there's the Techno-Optimist Manifesto from Horowitz. The people who look at it for a kind of right-wing version of this.
We should link all of those in our show notes, both the Dario essay and the other ones, and the poem that the Dario essay is based on.
Right, exactly.
Excellent.
Well, it's always a pleasure, sir.
Okay, see you soon.